know that virtual coaching has become more competitive than ever. NASM's got you covered with our virtual coaching course. NASM's virtual coaching course provides a complete solution to help you translate your services into a successful virtual platform. This course will give you the tools to build and operate a sustainable virtual business model. The formats may be different, but you're still delivering fitness training and effective behavioral coaching. That doesn't change even if you can't be in the same physical space as your clients. The truth is, this is the way to reach more clients and expand your reach and impact. There's never been a better time to carve out your very own virtual space, and NASM is here to help. Welcome to NASM's virtual coaching.
You are listening to the NASM CPT podcast with Rick Richey, the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Welcome to the NASM CPT podcast. My name is Rick Richey. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm actually pretty excited about the guest that we're having today. And the reason I'm excited is because we've already had her on before. And I have to admit, and no disrespect to any of my previous guests, but it's probably my favorite episode of the NASM CPT podcast that we have ever done. I've gotten incredible comments on it. And this person that's joining us today, we have a lot in common. She is a neuroscientist, so that we do not have in common at all. She is in the vetting process of, I don't know, maybe becoming an astronaut. And I grew up about 45 miles away from Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So there's a little relation there. And then the other thing we have in common is that she used to be a pole vaulter. And in fact, I was a pole vaulter in high school. So with all that being said, we really don't have a lot in common. She is a stellar mind and has been brought on to be a part of the NASM Scientific Advisory Board. Dr. Allison Brager, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Believe it or not, I actually went pole vaulting for the first time in 2 years last Sunday, and I am still very sore. And it's not like, it's like those small muscle groups around your obliques and like your calves. Oh my gosh, like they still hurt. So I tried to pole vault like every few years, but then a week or 2 weeks after that, it's, you're quickly reminded why, what happens to your body when you get older and you stop doing something.
Oh, I know. I go to the driving range to hit golf balls once every like 5 years. And you have no idea how much pain you can be in after just swinging at, 100 balls or something like that. Also, I'm with you. Every year I try to do a back handspring and I've not failed yet. So I do a back handspring, but I have not pole vaulted in ages. And I remember the first time after high school that I had gone back to the high school to help support my coach and helping other pole vaulters. That was a spooky experience getting back for me. Were you able to bend the pole your first time running back? After not doing it for
I shouldn't say I cleared, but I had the bungee at 12 feet and I was able to make it over the 12-foot bungee. I was holding on I had a 12-foot pole holding about 10 feet. I'll send you a video after this, but I was able to get a little bend. I also do back handsprings every year on my birthday. So we do have that in common.
That's amazing.
If you look at my Instagram from like last week, my birthday was last week and I did a back handspring on my birthday.
Happy birthday. I did a back handspring. It was, if you look back at my Instagram, it's a video 4 or 5 posts ago because I'm not the most up-to-date poster. And I had to do it on the beach because this year was the first year I just freaked myself out. Like, what if this is the year I can't do it? And so I was about to do it at the gym and I totally balked and then I freaked myself out. So anyway, I went to the beach and I was like, even if I land on my head in this soft sand, it'll be tough. And then I started thinking, well, it's going to be harder to jump. There were so
Yeah.
many things wrong. And of course, I was thinking, well, it's not the jump I'm worried about. It is, in fact, the landing. So I went ahead and did it. First time, not the most beautiful flip, but accomplished nonetheless.
I did see that. I was very impressed. I do remember seeing that.
Oh, thanks. You weren't like, oh, keep your knees together, point your toes.
Oh God, mine was atrocious. Actually, my former gymnastics coach commented on it and like with a bunch of laughing faces. So, yeah,
As would my martial arts and Chinese
yeah.
acrobatics teacher. I'm sure he never watched it because he would be too embarrassed. But with that said, let's talk a little bit about the Scientific Advisory Board at NASM. What's going on there? What is that, and how did this come about?
Yeah, so I've served on the scientific advisory board for a little over a year now. The first meeting I attended was at the Optima conference back in 2019 when it was in Phoenix, Arizona. Uh, I think we all took for granted how awesome that conference was given the year of 2020 and,
Right.
everything being virtual this year. So yeah, what's really unique about the scientific advisory board is you have all these subject matter experts who do clinical research with athletes and athletic relevant populations. Myself, I'm a active duty military scientist, so a lot of the data I collect is in military personnel and then military relevant populations like athletes. So all of us specialize in a different unique aspect related to human performance and the recovery side of performance. So we have experts who are doctors in exercise physiology, biochemistry, nutrition, sleep. So that's obviously where my role on the board is.
Yeah.
Techniques of myofascial release, PTs who've done extensive research, either sort of validating or testing and evaluating some new technique or tool out there to augment recovery. And so essentially, we are working together to write doctrine, write textbooks, write educational material that is evidence based, supported by empirical research, peer reviewed. So there's absolutely, no question in terms of the content that is put out there for NASM, right? Because you're getting the best of the best to write about the latest and greatest scientific discoveries and applying those scientific discoveries to the everyday warrior to, be their best.
That is fascinating. Let me ask another question because it seems, at least in common media and social media, we're seeing a lot of questioning that goes on with the scientific process and things like that. What is the value? How valuable is it to know that the content that's being put forth and what is being espoused by NASM is based on evidence and based on empirical evidence that's been researched and not just clinical evidence, which is at my facility, this is the result I got from this particular intervention?
Yeah, that is an awesome question because literally on the drive over here, I was venting to my best friend. She's a sleep researcher at Penn
Hmm.
about this because, there are on the internet a lot of charlatans out there who claim that they're an expert in something, but then they don't have the licensing or like the credentials to support them. Um, so when it comes to the work we have done with NASM, it's not just looking at one clinical study. It is looking at a cohort and a plethora of clinical studies that either support or in some cases may not fully support whatever key point we're making about sleep, nutrition, and different training regimens. Uh, that's the thing. It's like one clinical study, it it goes through the peer review process, right? It's not just observational, and you have a team of experts who are evaluating its merit and um, its scientific validity based on whatever statistical tools they use, collection techniques, etc. But then when you compile all those studies together and you find a common theme and a common story, that's what makes the doctrine and the educational materials coming out of NASM unique, because you have an expert in whatever particular field searching through all the clinical data, finding the most relevant ones, but then also finding, again, cases that challenge some clinical trials. But at the same time, there's a consistent message based on following the principles and practices of the scientific method.
I love it. Let's follow the scientific method to make sure that everything is sensible. And one of the things I remember is that it needs to be repeatable. So it can't just
Yes.
be this one-off study and then it never gets repeated. It never gets put back to the test. And that's even the thing in research, where they basically detail every single thing that they do, all the way down to notes that they give to folks that are part of the study. And the reason that's being done is so that other people can take that study, they can repeat everything and see what the outcomes are. And
Yeah.
then you get kind of this chart with all of these dots and all these points and things like that. And there's from time to time there's going to be an outlier, but if you are completely outside of what a previous study shows, then there's some serious discrepancy, and that then says, well, you can't take either one of these research studies because we don't know what the truth
Yeah.
is, which has to be studied again.
Yeah. So I'll give you a good anecdotal story related to that. So, and it's related to my own field of sleep and circadian rhythms.
Oh, great.
So about 15 years ago, there was this unique neuroanatomical structure in the brain that was discovered, and it's called the food entrainable oscillator. So it's this idea that animals and obviously humans, if we were left to our own chagrin and not didn't have work sleep schedules that we have to follow, um, basically there's animals seek out food at specific times of the day, and when they seek out this food that has independently controlled by hunger signals, has to do with this neuroanatomical structure in the brain called the food entrainable oscillator. So there was this group of researchers at Harvard who discovered it, published their findings in Science, which is like the best of the best scientific medical journal in the world. And then there was a group in Canada who basically took the data, took the experiment, followed it exactly, and got the opposite results. And then a subsequent lab in Virginia did the same thing, got opposing results. So through all of this and multiple years of debates and back and forth letters to the editor, written to Science and Nature and all these flagship journals, it was discovered that the Harvard group, there was an error in how they reported how these animals were showing increased activity around the time of food presentation. And so their findings were, essentially not valid, and they had to retract their data and everything. But again, that's just one of many examples why peer review is important and why it's so critical to outline everything that you're doing in the process. And again, it goes back to NASM, right? Like you have done an excellent job consulting with the experts who are pouring through. I mean, when we write this doctrine, we're pouring through thousands of databases to find the best research out there that's published in the best journals with the best supporting evidence.
Man, what a crazy story. Thanks for sharing that. All right, and I've got something else that I want you to share. And it really doesn't have anything to do with what we were just talking about, though I do appreciate the input on that story. I find it fascinating. It also goes to show that just because a very prestigious school is at the heart of a study, it still needs to be validated. So thank you for sharing that. I want to know about a post that you made recently on social. It had something to do with potentially becoming an astronaut. Now, listen, that is not a lot of people that are auditioning for this gig, right? So this is fascinating to me. And like I mentioned earlier, I grew up about 45 miles away from space camp.
Mhm.
And I always wanted to go, but my parents just thought I wanted to go because other kids went, and that may be true. But with that being said, it was a huge part of what we studied in that area in North Alabama because it was such a big part of
Yeah.
our culture. And the Redstone Arsenal and the Space and Rocket Center, all of these rocket scientists, some of the top in the world, converging into this small town in Alabama, doing some of the most fantastic things in the world. So I'm fascinated with astronauts and this story. So talk me through this process. Certainly, NASM would be super proud to have an astronaut on board as a scientific advisory board. Tell me how this came about. How does one become an astronaut, and then what are some of the challenges that go along with that?
Sure. To speak on your point, I actually just finished reading this amazing historical account of the history of NASA. It's called American Moonshot, and it spends a
Ooh.
lot of time talking about the German scientists who were brought to America, the Redstone Arsenal, to create the space program.
Oh yeah.
Great book, by the way. So there's a lot of, I'm sure for you, a lot of hometown references in it.
I would love to get that book. Thank you.
Yeah, it's called American Moonshot. Actually, you know what? I just finished it. Send me your address and I'll send it to you. All right?
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sounds good. So I've always wanted to be an astronaut. I grew up in Ohio, so I remember in second grade I dressed up as Neil Armstrong and did like an autobiography, not an autobiography, a biographical account of him. And actually, my great uncle was a program manager for the Apollo space missions. So
Whoa.
I had always, like, in the back of my head, wanted to be an astronaut. And then, of course, being a scientist, I was like, oh my gosh, it would be amazing if I could do research, especially as a physiologist and a physiologist who studies how humans thrive in extreme environments. Like, that'd
Yeah.
be amazing. But nobody quite knows the process to becoming an astronaut, right?
Right.
So I will say a lot of this came out through luck and opportunity. I have a sergeant major here, where I am presently at Fort Knox in the United States Recruiting Command, who the very first day he met me, he was like, as a captain at the time, he's like, Captain Brager, you're going to be an astronaut. And I'm like, what, Sergeant Major?
Huh.
He's like, yeah, the Army has this Army astronaut program where every few years there's a call for applications. And then you're basically moved through a pipeline. And so that's basically what happened is this time in the spring, NASA put out basically a nationwide call for applications. So they had civilian applications, they had applicants apply from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. So I was an applicant for the Army, and I know I have like been narrowed down to a smaller pool. I don't know what the pool is, but
Okay.
I'm trying to do everything in my power to show that, I have what it takes to be an astronaut. From deploying to an austere environment, which I have before, and I actually might do here again in the upcoming months, to getting scuba certified. So that's what I was doing down in Florida. Was I was through Walter Reed, which is where I used to be and do clinical sleep research.
Mhm.
They have a dive medicine program. So I did a dive medicine course for 2 weeks. Hands down, the most intense 2 weeks of my life because in
Really?
9 days, we got open water, advanced open water, medical rescue, and nitrox certified. So we basically condensed 6 to 6 months to a year's worth of work into 9 days. I did like 15 dives. Like, you talk about what happens to your physiology under that much change and pressure mixed with physics. I mean, I slept like a baby at night. I will tell you that. I had very intense REM sleep and dreams, which, get me thinking now about like, you know, REM sleep and the function of it and the circuitry of it and all that stuff. But it definitely took me about 3 weeks to recover from that course, I would say physiologically. Anytime I did a CrossFit workout, even a mild one during the course or even after the course, the room would spin. I threw up once,
Wow.
like, and it wasn't because I was dehydrated and all of that. It was just my body was just exposed to so much, the natural elements and pressure. But it makes sense that scuba is used for astronaut training because every step of the process from getting on your scuba gear to remaining calm is absolutely critical. And especially where we were diving. We were in Key West at very popular diving spots. So we were in a low key, and then there's this wreck called the Vandenberg wreck site. And as you're descending down to about 100 feet, which again, like you talk about extreme pressure on the pulmonary and the vestibular balance system, there's barracudas along the line just watching us descend. I would say in the course of 9 days, I saw about 50 barracudas, a bull shark, a nurse shark. Like I saw all the wildlife that, the human mankind fears. But that's part of the process though, right? Because when you're in space, like your gear is your lifesaver. And you always have to stay calm, like in the face of danger.
I think as far as we know right now, when you go into space, there are no space creatures that could potentially attack you. So
No.
I'm going space is safer right now after that story.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it would be an absolute honor to do research up at the space station. I actually have a classmate from Brown. She's an astronaut, Jessica Muir, who was up there doing research. She has very similar lines of research as me, studying humans in extreme environments. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see how far I make it. Hopefully, I make it all the way. But
Well, good luck with it. I think it's really exciting, and I hope that your crash scuba course is something that accelerates your opportunities. I also am curious, when you talk about extreme environments, what are some of the things that you study and research about extreme environments, and what are some of the outcomes that come from that? And then what are the results, right? So you're
yeah.
studying extreme environments so humans can better adapt and work and function within those extreme environments. So what do you study there that gives you the knowledge to say, now that you're in this extreme environment, we found that if you do this, you can do this better in this particular environment? What are some of these outcomes? What are you studying?
Yeah, so that's a large part of it. So there's three things we're interested in. First, it's observational. We pick an extreme environment and see, mostly with sleep and human performance, right? So we're interested how their sleep patterns adapt to that environment, and then we're also interested in their cognitive performance, how it changes in that environment with changes in sleep, because there's such a myriad of intimate relationships between the two. And then after that, we create these predictive models to see who's sensitive and who is resilient in that environment. And to us, that's the most critical, right? Because when you think about military operations, you want soldiers and you want athletes who are able to endure and be resilient to these chronic environmental stressors day in and day out. And then the third thing is countermeasures. For the most part, we like to use caffeine as a countermeasure to sort of offset any performance deficits we see. So three things that I've worked on in particular is one is we actually just published this a few months ago in Scientific Reports. We did a year-long longitudinal assessment of sleep patterns and cognitive performance in Antarctica, actually in the southernmost region of the world. It's this research station owned by the Argentinian government that we have a collaboration with. And what's really unique about this environment, and just shows how amazing humans are, is you have these humans who go down there and they're there for a year, right? The southernmost point in the entire world. But 6 months out of that year, they have no access to resources. So there's no food that can get to them. There's no medical evacuation. There's nothing. They're on their own. So if something happens, they run out of food, they run out of water, there's a need for medical evacuation. Well, they're there and they're just going to have to figure out what to do and how to survive, right?
Yeah,
So
sounds like space.
exactly. Except in
Yeah,
space, like they do have, routine like food and supplies that come up for
right.
them. But still, sometimes it might not make it. Um, So what's unique about that, right, is you have that element, and then you also have the fact they have constant light exposure or they have constant dark exposure. And
Right.
that's gonna screw with their sleep and wake cycles.
Sure.
So what we found, and this just shows just how adaptive humans are, and it goes with the like, you talk about the physiological principle of homeostasis, right? Wow,
Hmm.
there's always a balance or a shift in one system to compensate for another. Is during the winter months, they're sleeping about the same amount as they are during the summer months, but the only difference is they have more frequent napping cycles. So they have shorter sleep episodes, but they have more frequent sleep episodes. So they have this what we call
Huh.
multiphasic sleep schedules, and that's a unique adaptation that happens. Um, Another study we've done is ultra marathon runners. In my humble opinion, ultra marathon runners are the best real world example of sleep deprivation under high physical and cognitive load, right? Because
Yeah.
you're running 100 miles, and one, you're willingly running 100 miles, right?
Right.
This
Right.
imagine, I mean, I got into this area of research with my lab mate from grad school because he and his wife do ultras, and it's a great model of sleep deprivation. And you run until you finish. It usually takes 26, 27 hours. So we
Yeah.
can look at the impact of performance over time. So, how changes in circadian rhythms, but then also sleep deprivation change your race pace. And so, what we found is that based on the race pace you adopt, it is very predictive of who will finish and who will drop out. We just published that data in the journal
Interesting.
Sleep Science. Um, and then the last thing that we've done is in the lab we could study this, right? So this paper of ours, it just came out in the Proceedings of Shift Work, where we
Mm.
basically we put research subjects under, I think it's one of the most aggressive cycles of sleep deprivation that's ever been done in a lab. So they were there for 18 days, and across those 18 days, they were awake 80% of the time.
Wow.
And that's typical to what actually soldiers do. I've done it myself downrange where you're awake for 48 hours straight, and then you have 3 days to recover, and then you go on another mission and you're awake for 48 hours straight, recover, do it again. So what we did is we assessed their cognitive performance under the sleep deprivation. And then we also took a DNA sample to screen for certain naturally occurring mutations in the human genetic code. And we found that there is an actual gene associated with the neurochemical adenosine. So adenosine is
Okay.
neurochemical responsible for sleep. I'm a nerd. I actually have adenosine tattooed here on, I don't know, it on my forearm. Not
There it
not
is.
not for that reason, but adenosine is like the chemical of life, the neurochemical of life, essentially, and the building block of life. Um, but we found that individuals that have this mutation, certain individuals are just more resilient to sleep deprivation under the schedule and can have very stable cognitive performance because of that. So that just gives you like a full snapshot of the things you can do under extreme conditions in the lab, in an athletic setting, and then under very extreme conditions of being in the southernmost region of the world.
Okay, now I have several questions, but I want to follow up one about the sleep deprivation over time because as you were talking about it, having working for several days straight, or even the journal that it was published in on shift work, right? So this brings up something that's very concerning to me and has been for a while, which are medical workers. So people who are
Yep.
working in hospitals, and they do these what I consider to be absurdly long hours with really high stakes. And I think you could say that for the military as well, right?
Yeah.
Like these absurdly long hours and really high stakes. And a mistake is not just
It's life
it
or
can be
death.
big, right? Yeah, it can be big.
Yeah.
So with that being said, one of the interesting things that I had read about was there was a doctor who initially did this, and because he was a physician and he stayed up all the time, and he was the one that didn't understand why other people can't do what he does, and he was very
Yep.
demanding of the medical staff. and he would stay up really long, and then it was found out posthumously that once he died, that he had a cocaine addiction, and the reason he was awake all the time is because he was doing bumps in between shifts and staying super awake. I think he knew why other people couldn't do it, but he was so
Yeah.
demanding. Even without that, they were forced to do his thing. So here's the interesting thing, Allison. They didn't change it. they,
Yeah.
they haven't changed the protocol in decades. And I don't know. I just have a problem with that. And I know that caffeine can only get you so far.
Yep.
So what are your
So
thoughts about
we've done
this?
that study too.
Okay.
I could talk a little bit about the policy change because
Good.
the sleep researcher and sleep physician who is responsible for that, Dr. Chuck Seisler out of Harvard, he's been a mentor to me and others over the years. And he wasn't this guy, but he,
Right.
when he was in medical school, is the same thing. Like, they worked 120 hours, and he actually is the person responsible for why why physicians and uh, res- residents can only work 80 hours now because of
Okay.
collecting this data to show that there's increased needle sticks. That was a big finding. It was published, I think, in JAMA or the New England Journal of Medicine, and other, like minor medical things that could lead over time to catastrophe.
Hmm.
Um, but the caffeine stuff, so you're absolutely right. And we actually have done that study previously. My colleagues back at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research is we put people on what we call a chronic sleep deprivation schedule,
Okay.
which is honestly very common to most of us in the modern world. And it's basically you're only sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night across 7 days. And this is in, normal healthy sleepers. So they didn't have any pre-existing history of sleep issues or
Okay.
other comorbidities. And they're usually sleeping about 8 hours. So,
Now, are these soldiers?
no, they're actually civilians. So we do recruit soldiers for our studies, but it's, they're military relevant populations, right? So they're between
Yeah.
the ages of 20 and 39 because that's usually what you see in active duty military. Um, so anyway, we brought them to the lab. They were only sleeping 5 hours at a time. And then they were given caffeine dosing schedules where every few hours they were given 200 milligrams of caffeine, which is about a equivalent of a like grande at Starbucks. Okay.
Okay.
And we found that
It sounds
after
like my dosing structure. Yeah.
exactly, mine too. I'm a little bougie and make my own French press every morning with
You
like
are bougie.
this coffee service of beans I get from around the country, but it's same thing, right? No.
Okay.
Um, so anyway, we found that after 3 days, basically caffeine stopped working. So because they were
Ooh.
shortening their sleep, it only took 3 days for caffeine to stop working. And it wasn't until these research subjects got good quality sleep again that their cognitive performance returned to normal levels. And what's interesting is it mirrors all the other findings we find over the years with chronic sleep deprivation. I think I talked about this last time. There's this beautiful series of studies done on um, disruptions in anabolic hormone release, where 3 days into only sleeping 5 hours a night, you see plasma testosterone levels at 50% of their normal baseline levels. And it's not until these males get good quality sleep that their testosterone goes back into normal, healthy physiological levels.
That reminds me, so just recently, I had a guest on the show who's a bodybuilder, and he was talking about. I asked about recovery, and he said, so, sleep's important, but Arnold Schwarzenegger's very famous line when he said,
Yep.
you sleep 6 hours a day, and you have all this other time, and somebody was like, 7 or 8, they called it out, and he goes, really? And famously looked at him and goes, sleep faster. So I don't know if sleeping faster is a possibility,
It
but
is, through technology. That's, something without saying too much we're sort of experimenting with, in the military is sort of because when you transition into sleep, you have to hit the later stages and to then hit the deep restorative stages of non-REM sleep and REM sleep. So there's this idea that if you coax the brain through these lighter stages of sleep faster, like you can make 5 hours of sleep look like 8 hours of sleep.
Now, and that has to do with just hitting different brainwave activity and maintaining that brainwave activity for X amount of time.
Exactly. So you're hitting a unique neuroanatomical like area and circuit of the brain that is responsible for these transitions through the lighter and deeper stages of non-REM sleep and then REM sleep.
And did that process somehow start to filter out the adenosine buildup in the brain?
Well, so this is like, this is like the start of many, many years of work. So like we're just focusing on the, I guess you could say the EEG, the brain activity output now.
Okay.
But down the road, yes, like I'll probably be the
Interesting.
nerd that does the neurochemical characterization, hopefully in
All right.
space,
Well,
right? Like that's
yeah,
what I
that would
want
be
to do is
awesome.
bring this technology to space, make us only sleep 3 hours, perform like we're sleeping 10. Like I think NASA would appreciate that.
I'm sure there's got to be a NASA IRB that at some point goes, Allison, no. Enough is enough.
Yeah. Take your
Um,
med signs somewhere else.
yeah, that's exactly right. How are you measuring these things? I mean, I'm assuming you're not just doing a Whoop or an Aura Ring or an Apple Watch. How are you measuring these outcomes?
So it's gold standard, right? Polysomnography. So the full EEG hookup where
On the head?
yeah, on the head, frontal areas, occipital areas, temporal, and other cortical
Wow.
areas. Yeah, I mean, ideally, you only need 8 EEG leads to get a full comprehensive profile of sleep to identify light, deep, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep. You can use the wearables as as a secondary tool. And some of the wearables like the Whoop have done clinical validation of their product to show that it's just as good as the gold standard, which is, polysomnography. But obviously, as a heuristic sleep scientist, we're always going to go with the gold standard because, that there's so many more elements of it that you can look at that are lacking in a wearable. Again, a
Gotcha.
wearable is a great start, but it's not the final outcome, especially if you're talking about implementing this new age technology and looking for new discoveries. Because with the EEG, where it has its value and its power, is you're able to look at individual waveforms and quantify those individual waveforms to look at microsleeps. That's something that a wearable can't track. Is those things that create
Yeah.
life and death situations for a doctor or a soldier where they're driving a military vehicle and all of a sudden they like have a lapse and cognition called a microsleep and they fall asleep for like 3 seconds and
Oh
then
yeah.
you know 3 seconds later they've hit the person in front of them or dare I say it like have killed somebody. So which has happened before, right? Um so those are the things with EEG that you really can track over time is just like how tired the human brain gets under these challenges of sleep deprivation and shift work.
Oh, this is fascinating. All right. So, something else fascinating that I want to talk to you about is for those of you who are listening to the podcast and not watching, you don't know what's going on, but Allison is set up in an incredible studio. So this is not what she produced last time when she was on the show. She's in a studio right now. There's a gaming chair. There's these egg crate foam blocking sound and things like that. It looks like a gaming chair in a gaming room. And from what I think, the Army has taken to gaming a little bit. So can you speak to that a little bit before we open up the doors, if we've got a few minutes to let
Yeah,
people ask questions of you? But talk to us about that.
sure. So I am live from the Army Esports studio, and this is a group of active duty and National Guard and Reserve soldiers who basically compete internationally for the Army in esports. And games that are very military relevant. So Call of Duty, League of Legends, games of wartime strategy where you have teammates that you have to communicate with in order to, you know, communicate, move, and shoot and accomplish a mission and, reach an objective. So it makes sense that over the years, the Army has sort of evolved into using esports to build what we call cognitive flexibility. So the ability to make accurate and fast decisions under increasing cognitive load. What I mean by that is incoming visual and auditory stimuli that might be conflicting to your objective, and you have to decipher like what to follow and what to ignore. It's a good way to build team cohesion because you're creating these internal and external stressful environments through the act of competing, and you have to communicate with each other in order to accomplish a mission. And then psychological resiliency too is just giving you this exposure to certain situations in an artificial or augmented virtual reality environment that hypothetically can make you more prepared and successful when you're confronted with the real thing. So one of the things we've done is sort of look at what makes these esports athletes so elite. So what is it about the reaction time and how the reaction time changes under increasing cognitive load? And actually, we had the opportunity last year to take our esports team out to the Mamba Sports Academy that Kobe Bryant and his business partners stood up after he retired, and they actually did these head-to-head cognitive tests, and we compared their performance with some of the NBA and NFL players who were out there doing these similar cognitive tests, and they destroyed these professional athletes on all these tests of cognition. And for me, I needed to see that because as a traditional sport athlete, right, like I had my biases about what it meant to be an esports athlete, and I will admit, at first, I had a hard time calling them athletes, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
they really are like cognitive athletes, and like their brains are so on point that my brain will never be like that. Like even and how I converse with them now, and how I watch them type emails, just like the speed at which they type, like damn, their brain is like my brain is like a Honda Civic, and their brain is like this souped up Porsche. Like it's just that much more high speed and high processing. But that's what you want, right? In the next generation of soldiers. So the idea is to use esports for future recruiting and selection purposes, in addition to augmenting like team unity, cohesion, and treating the brain as a muscle, essentially.
I don't even know how to respond to that. I feel like there's so many questions that just popped up. Like, is the way that the brain reacts, as somebody is in that position because their brain reacts at a certain speed, which allows them to be elite, but they also have the physical body that supports it. But are there smaller athletes that brains move and think and function with more acuity, but they have a smaller frame? They're little guys, so they can't play in the NFL. So right, like
Yeah.
this is like bringing a stick to a brawl. It's an equalizer. Everybody has the same remote control. They've got the same body. They've got the same
Yeah.
avatar. So now it's not contingent on are you also bigger, faster, stronger. Now it's only contingent on whether or not you can think faster.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, they do what's unique about them too is, they're still soldiers in the army, so they still stay fit. They still do, the last time we did a podcast, I did it from the Warrior Fitness Team training facility. So,
Yeah.
they do functional fitness and CrossFit workouts in there. So they are very fit too. And that's a
I am
program.
too, but I'm not in the NFL. You know what
Well,
I mean?
so that's actually, when we went out to Mamba, that was a technique that we learned, and it makes sense, right? Because as an athlete, I always did better in school and had better focus if I trained or worked out beforehand. Like, and
Yeah.
it was the same thing with them too. Is like, so there's like a whole contingent of esports athletes that train now out of the Mamba Sports Academy, and they they do physical training before a cognitive training session, and then they go back to physical training and then do more cognitive training. So we had our guys do that, and like at first they were whooped, right? Because they weren't
Yeah.
used to like that type of strength and conditioning training, but by the end, like they loved it. And, it's
Do you
something that
see
we try to model here.
their mental acuity, their faculties work a little bit faster post workout?
So we haven't looked at it post-workout, but we have looked at it, first day versus last day of this 4-day regimen of doing
Ah,
this, physical cognitive training. And I was quite surprised because, there's such thing in science as a ceiling effect. And, once you're already elite, it's really hard to, like with pole
get a
vault, right?
leader.
Like, we'll use pole vault as an example. Like once you
Okay.
jump 13 feet, it could take years before you get, jump 13.3 or 13.6, right?
Yeah.
Like, but they, within this 4 days of doing this physical fitness cognitive regimen, they were able to improve their reaction time and their reaction time under increasing cognitive load. So I do believe it works.
Wow, amazing. All right, fantastic. I love talking to you. Actually, I love listening to you. Me talking has nothing to do with anything. It's listening to you. Let me go and give somebody else the opportunity to ask you questions. So I'm going to ask our producer, Greg, to hop in here and see if there are any questions. Hey, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
Good
morning.
morning.
So we do have, or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm on the West Coast, so morning here still. But so looking at the chat, we do have a question from Brooke, who is wondering, I've only slept about 5 to 6 hours a night since I was young. I'm curious how this is possibly negatively affecting.
Awesome question. So, I get this question a lot. I work with a lot of military personnel and tactical firefighter communities. And, sometimes these individuals, I feel like they pre-select into those communities because they're able to function in 5 or 6 hours of sleep. So sleep, much like any physiological process or, process in nature, it's on a bell curve, right? So the average person needs 8.4 hours of sleep. Some people, unfortunately, need 10 hours. Some people are really lucky. Like there's this thing that historically most US presidents only sleep 4 hours a night. Some people have that genetic, makeup to let them sleep 4 hours a night. So usually the gold test, if you are somebody who's only sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, and this is true to this day, despite the wealth of clinical studies out there, is how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? There's this assessment we do. It's called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, or you can do the Stanford Sleepiness Scale. And if you're somebody who consistently sleeps 5 or 6 hours and you function normally, and then you don't need caffeine or any stimulant to keep you awake during the day, then you're fine. Like again, all the research we do is we're using 8 hours as an average. So when we do those chronic sleep restriction studies, we purposefully select out people who need 8 hours. So then we could truncate their sleep by 60%, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That makes sense. All right, cool. I agree. I knew a guy at a place where I used to train, and he slept 1 to 2 hours a night, and he
One
just
to
he
two
had
hours a night? Wow.
yeah, and he was like, I have no idea. He goes, but I mean, he was super rich, and I'm assuming that that was part of the process that allowed him to just. I'm working while everybody else is sleeping, and he certainly
Well,
got ahead in his world.
I mean, Elon Musk is like that. I mean, there's actually a lot of evidence to show a lot of high-powered executives like that. That's as much as they sleep. Um, but we have to remind ourselves that they are anomalies, just like there are athletes
Yes.
out there who are anomalies. So, yeah.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And I'm by no means advocating giving that a go.
Yeah.
My
Oh,
naps can run
I
that long.
couldn't do it.
So yeah, exactly. All right, Greg, do we have anything else?
Yeah, Matthew in the chat wants to know if, Allison, if you have any pointers on training for the Army's new PT test that they've put out and how to go about that.
Yeah, I really enjoy this new PT test because it's really getting out of the 9 fundamental attributes of athleticism. So in the past, the test used to really only test like cardiovascular endurance and neuromuscular endurance, and this is a testing stamina, agility, balance, all those things that are required when you go down range, and different tasks and military skills you have to do in order to survive and accomplish a mission. So what's really great about this test is it's really brought a sense of purpose to functional fitness. Functional fitness across multiple domains. So we're talking CrossFit, we're talking strongman, we're talking HIIT workouts. Honestly, I think, from a very physiological standpoint, so speaking as like a subject matter expert in physiology, that's the best way to train for it, is to do these high lactate acid threshold workouts where you're building up your anaerobic system, because as research shows, if you train the anaerobic system, it could lend and bleed over into aerobic training where the opposite is not true. So I think it's a healthy mix of doing HIIT training however you see fit. Um, and you have to do it consistently, right? And that's what makes this new PT test so great, is because it requires a lifestyle change. The old PT test, what would happen is you have soldiers who basically just, sit on their chair in their cubicle for 4 months, and then a month or two before the PT test, they start dieting, they start running. The Army's trying to get away from that lifestyle, right? They want holistic health and fitness to be 24/7 part of being a soldier.
All right. That's fascinating. I think it's good to point that out, because we've talked about that with other physiologists that have come on the show about the importance of focusing on anaerobic training because of its beneficial effects on the aerobic system as well. But we don't necessarily see the flip of that being true. So
Yeah.
that, I think that's really interesting. And I think that making some wise changes in these the steps that are being made with the new PT test. All right, Greg, one more question. What else you got?
Yeah, Howard wants to know talk about the difference between the quality of sleep and the quantity of sleep that you get. How does that work together and play together?
Yeah. So excellent question. Sleep quality, in my opinion, based on the research that in the research camp I come from, sleep quality is more important than sleep quantity. And the reason I say that is because individuals who have sleep fragmentation, common in athletes, it's common in military personnel, where they're constantly waking up throughout the night, their performance the next day suffers from that. And part of the reason they're waking up is because they're not getting good quality sleep. So they're not entering the deep restorative stages of sleep. And that's really common with, certain sleep disorders such as sleep apnea. The thing is if you get good quality sleep where you're entering this deepest stages of non-REM sleep or REM sleep, which, amount to about 2 to 4 hours of total sleep time. If you're maximizing that, you are going to be able to perform well or relatively well the next day. And if you're staying in bed for 10 hours and you're only getting about 30 minutes of that quality sleep, we have years and years of research to show that sleep quality, it's in particular, it's called slow wave activity sleep. It's if you look at a brain activity on a monitor, it basically looks like these slow rolling mountains. If you're getting that kind of good quality sleep, then that is going to, better your mental health and your physical health much, much more than staying in bed for 10 hours and, never hitting this deep, slow wave activity sleep.
Interesting. I do have one more question then, if you've got time to just field one more.
Sure.
You can do it shortly. But that leads me to ask the question about HRV. Are y'all using HRV at all? And is it legitimately useful in activity preparedness?
So I have done some work in the past with the Whoop. We did a study last year to show with CrossFit during the CrossFit Open to show that the rate of recovery it takes, following doing one of these really intense CrossFit workouts. It takes about 2 or 3 days, and you could accelerate the recovery using certain recovery products. The one in particular we were working with was PR lotion. It's a sodium bicarbonate lotion, which is meant to rapidly replenish
Buffer lactic
acid levels. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only work I've done related to HRV and recovery. Regarding HRV and sleep, I know there have a lot of the wearable companies out there have done studies and are trying to do clinical validated studies where they're comparing, the sleep predictive algorithms of non-REM sleep and REM sleep against the gold standard, which again is polysomnography. But that's really all I can speak on. I think wearables at the end of the day, they're a great tool, and they're great for behavioral modification. But when it comes to, diagnosing sleep disorders or understanding the finite aspects of sleep, I think, you still have to go with the gold standard of polysomnography and go get a sleep study.
Amazing. All right. One thing that I want to point out to all of our listeners is the number of times that you've said the word studies or research. And this is exactly why we wanted you on our scientific advisory board. There's very, very little going, in my opinion, I believe that's not really in there. It's what does the research say? What does the study say? What's the empirical evidence say? And having somebody that can speak from that perspective and has such a library of knowledge of what's been written, what's been researched, and your own research that you've put out there, it matters. It matters so much. So thank you.
Yep. No, of course, absolutely.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to follow you on social or ask you a question?
Yeah, so I do have a Instagram channel. It's Doc Jock ZZZ. So DOCJOCKZZZ. I guess I can do a shout out for my book. So about 5 years ago, I wrote a book, essentially legitimizing the the neuroscience of athletes and the wonderful neuroplastic and dynamic healthy changes that happen to the brain and athletes, and sort of the brain of an elite athlete and what separates the brain of an elite athlete from an amateur athlete. It's called Meathead: Unraveling the Athletic Brain, and you can buy it on Amazon or from the Barnes and Noble bookstore.
I just typed it into my browser so I can buy it as soon as we get off of the phone.
Yeah.
Off of the call. All right, Dr. Allison Brager, thank you so much for
being
absolutely here.
It's good seeing you again.
Always, it's a pleasure. I'd love to have you back at some point, so we'll make that happen. 2021. Let's get 2020 behind us. We'll make 2021
2021.
happen.
So I find out next fall if I got selected by NASA. So yeah, we'll do it after that. So
we'll have some follow-ups.
Yeah, we're gonna send that out to the universe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And for everybody listening and watching, thank you so much. My name is Rick Richey. You can reach out to me at dr.rickrichey on Instagram or rick.richey, RICHEY, NASM.org. This has been the NASM CPT podcast.